Distinguished guests, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here today on behalf of Africa Investor for the 6th Africa Investor CEO Institutional Investment Summit. We have a great program lined up for you today. 8 sessions, over 40 speakers, and a high-level lunch with political and UN leaders, followed by the Africa Investor Index Series Awards that recognize Africa's capital market success stories. That will be followed by lots of networking. Many of you know Africa Investor through our market-leading publication, Africa Investor Magazine, which with your continued support is now read by over 1 million investment, business, and government decision makers around the globe. And through our series of CEO investment roadshows on agribusiness, infrastructure, tourism investment, and capital markets, Africa Investor as an institution has used that opportunity to position ourselves to intermediate capital to many investment opportunities across the continent through our growing domestic and global client base. Africa Investor Capital, the advisory side of our business, continues to originate, advise on, and facilitate transactions and advise governments, development finance institutions, and investors on investing in Africa. As AI Capital, we facilitated over the years several $1 billion worth of transactions, and our current book for Africa Investor Capital sits in excess of $3 billion worth of assets diversified across multiple growth sectors on the continent. We trust this summit will support additional relationships and transactions for each of you, and we hope that it's going to be very fruitful, of course. In terms of order of business for the day, we have 3 key objectives. Firstly, to facilitate knowledge and assist African pension funds allocate more investment across borders in Africa. Secondly, to establish a platform for African and international pension funds on co-investment partnerships and models for international pension funds to invest more confidently and alongside African capital owners. And finally, to inform the agenda for the Africa Investor Heads of State Investment Advisory Council, which is lending support to the African Union's aims to mobilize domestic capital. That will be a key theme for the lunch that we'll be hosting with a number of leaders from the UN and governments in Africa today. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, NYSE Euronext, for their generous and continued support and partnership. We're grateful. SEC Nigeria, ASEA, US Angola Chamber of Commerce, Bunengi Group, and the China Foundation for Global Partnerships, here today with a very impressive delegation of business leaders from China. You're welcome. So without further ado, I'd like to wish you all a very fruitful summit, and now have the pleasure to hand over to Scott Cutler, Executive Vice President and Head of Listings, NYSE Euronext, to give the keynote. Thank you.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.